Dick the Bruiser was so legitimately terrifying that when a staged bar fight went wrong in 1963, he lifted a vending machine over his head and hurled it across the room. He destroyed the entire establishment. It took 8 police officers to subdue him. One officer's wrist was broken in the struggle. For 3 decades, Dick the Bruiser dominated professional wrestling through sheer force of will and an authenticity that could not be faked. He was a former NFL lineman who discovered he could make more money hurting people in the ring than on the football field. He was a promoter who built one of the most successful regional territories in American history. He was the original anti-hero, the beer-drinking, authority-defying tough guy whose persona Steve Austin would later take global. In the end, he was killed by the same injury that made him famous. The kick to the throat that gave him his legendary gravelly voice in 1954 would rupture and take his life in 1991. This is the story of the most dangerous man professional wrestling has ever known. William Fritz Afflis Jr. was born on June 27, 1929, in Delphi, Carroll County, Indiana, a small town about 70 miles northwest of Indianapolis. His father, Walter William Afflis, was a Duke University-educated World War I veteran, a 32nd-degree Mason, and a successful businessman who had purchased a half interest in a local drugstore before eventually moving the family to Indianapolis. His mother, Margaret Atkinson Afflis, was politically active, eventually serving as Indiana's 2nd District Democratic Vice Chairman and as Director of Probation for the state. On paper, it looked like a comfortable middle-class upbringing with opportunities most children of the era could only dream about. Then everything fell apart. His father died from peritonitis following an emergency appendectomy in Chicago on December 15, 1945. William was 16 years old. According to multiple accounts from people in the wrestling business, his mother subsequently remarried and effectively abandoned him. She left him with little more than an apartment and whatever he could scrape together on his own. Many wrestlers who knew Bruiser later pointed to this abandonment as the origin of his notorious mean streak. When your own mother throws you away as a teenager, something hardens inside you, something that never fully softens again. Young Afflis channeled his pain into athletics with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He had been attending Shortridge High School in Indianapolis, but when his family returned to the Delphi area, he faced a problem. Delphi had no high school football team. Most teenagers would have found another sport. Most teenagers would have adapted. William Afflis was not most teenagers. He left his family entirely. He moved into the YMCA on 7th Street in Lafayette. He enrolled at Lafayette Jefferson High School specifically so he could play football. He was willing to live alone in the YMCA as a teenager just to keep playing the sport he loved. By his senior year in 1946, he was the unanimous choice of all 3 major wire services for all state honors as a guard. His play was so violent that opposing teams routinely assigned 3 or 4 men to stop him. It rarely worked. His college career became a tour of destruction across 5 universities. He won a football scholarship to Purdue, where he earned a starting tackle position as a true freshman. His sophomore year brought all Big Ten honors and All-America mentions. He was on track to become one of the great college linemen of his era. Then he bashed his offensive line coach over the head with his helmet during a heated practice exchange. That ended his Purdue career. He cycled through Alabama, lasting only weeks. Notre Dame gave him 2 weeks before they had seen enough. Miami expelled him for allegedly running a gambling operation. He finally settled at the University of Nevada, Reno, where he earned unanimous All-Pacific Coast honors, actually graduated with a degree, and worked as a bouncer at Harold's Club. His signature move at the club was ripping phone books in half to intimidate troublemakers. The Green Bay Packers selected him in the 16th round of the 1951 NFL Draft, 186 overall. He became an immediate fixture on the roster, appearing in all 48 regular season games across 4 seasons from 1951 to 1954 and starting 31 of them. He played offensive line and defensive line during what Packers fans call the wilderness, the dismal years between the Curly Lambeau and Vince Lombardi eras, when the team went 15 wins, 32 losses, and 1 tie. It was not a glamorous time to be a Packer, but Afflis made his presence felt regardless of the team's record. His body was unlike anything else in the league. A 52-inch barrel chest sat on top of a 30-inch waist. He was an early proponent of bodybuilding when NFL players rarely lifted weights, spending hours in the gym building muscle mass that made him look like he belonged in a different sport entirely. He looked like someone had carved him out of granite and then made him angry. Opposing linemen dreaded facing him not because of his technique, but because of his sheer physical power and complete disregard for their well-being. The stories from his NFL career read like they were written by someone trying to create the most intimidating character possible. Upon arriving at the Hotel Northland in Green Bay, fresh from bouncing in Reno, he walked to the front desk, pulled 2 .45 caliber pistols from shoulder holsters and calmly asked to check them. The desk clerk, understandably startled, complied without question. During training camp, he challenged teammates to see who could smash the most beer cans over their heads. It was exactly the kind of contest where the winner was also somehow the loser. On a team train to Chicago, he threatened a heckling fan with a broken beer bottle, and the fan suddenly remembered he had somewhere else to be. When teammate Jerry Helloin was rumored to consider himself stronger than Afflis, Bruiser tracked him down for a strength contest. It ended only when Bruiser smashed a beer can against his own face, blood streaming down, at which point Helloin simply conceded. "You win." There was nothing else to say. But there was another side to him that occasionally emerged. When the Packers' first black player, Bob Mann, was refused service by a racist cab driver in Baltimore, Afflis opened the passenger door, dragged the driver onto the sidewalk, and forced him to take Mann. The same man who would destroy a bar and hospitalize police officers also understood that some things were worth fighting for. His football career ended after the 1954 season. His starts had declined from 12 as a rookie to just 3 in his final year. More importantly, a kick to the throat had damaged his larynx, permanently giving him the gravelly, raspy voice that would become his most recognizable trademark. He had also discovered something else. He could earn vastly more money wrestling than playing football. His first full year in the ring netted over $75,000, a sum that dwarfed NFL salaries of the era. Dick the Bruiser was born. He trained under Laverne Clarence and Joe Pazandak in Chicago during the 1954 off-season, learning the fundamentals of professional wrestling while his football career wound down. By 1955, working under promoter Fred Kohler in Chicago, he was already in main events against Verne and NWA World Champion Lou Thez. His NFL notoriety gave him instant credibility with audiences who recognized his name from sports pages. A throat injury gave him an unmistakable voice that sounded like gravel poured down a metal chute. His genuine toughness gave him something no amount of acting could provide. When Dick the Bruiser threatened to hurt someone, people believed him because they knew he could actually do it. Billed immediately as the world's most dangerous wrestler, Bruiser stood out by refusing to stand out. In an era of colorful gimmicks and elaborate costumes, he walked to the ring looking exactly like what he was, a former football player who was about to beat someone up. He later explained that when he started wrestling, everyone like Gorgeous George wore capes and big robes, really gaudy. He said he came along with just a pair of trunks and his shoes. He had no gimmick, and it was the absence of gimmicks that made him different. It was a revolutionary concept. While other wrestlers played characters and adopted personas, Dick the Bruiser simply was what he appeared to be, a man who could and would hurt you if you gave him reason. There was no winking at the audience. There was no theatrical posturing. There was just a dangerous man who had come to fight. His wrestling style was pure brawling, loaded forearms that could knock a man unconscious, clubbing blows to the back and chest, stomps that looked like they could crack ribs, unrelenting aggression from the opening bell to the finish. His finishing moves were the diving knee drop from the top rope and the atomic drop, both delivered with impact that made audiences wince. He also employed a devastating stomach claw that could incapacitate opponents for extended periods. He was among the first wrestlers to regularly bring weapons into the ring. Chairs, tables, whatever was available. If it could be used to hurt someone, Dick the Bruiser would find a way to use it. He was also an early master of the no-sell, shrugging off his opponent's offense to project absolute invincibility. When other wrestlers would sell moves by staggering around the ring, Bruiser would simply absorb the punishment and keep coming forward. It was terrifying to watch because it suggested there was nothing you could do to stop him. He was the first person to call Bobby Heenan the Weasel, a nickname that defined Heenan's entire career. Heenan got his start in Bruiser's Indianapolis territory as Pretty Boy Bobby Heenan, managing heel tag teams and generally making himself obnoxious. One day, Bruiser looked at him and called him a weasel, and somehow the name stuck for the next 4 decades. Heenan later credited Bruiser for launching his career in multiple ways. 2 incidents in particular cemented his reputation as wrestling's most legitimately dangerous man. These were not angles. These were not storylines designed to sell tickets. These were real events that demonstrated exactly why his nickname was not just marketing. On November 19, 1957, at Madison Square Garden, Bruiser and Dr. Jerry Graham faced fan favorites Antonino Rocca and Edouard Carpentier before nearly 13,000 fans. The match itself was heated, as matches involving Bruiser tended to be. After the match ended, Graham bloodied Rocca with a foreign object, and the brawling continued outside the ring. The crowd, already agitated by the violent finish, began pouring toward ringside. Graham later said that his partner, Dick the Bruiser, was picking up and throwing Puerto Ricans outside of the ring like a farmer picking potatoes. The scene erupted into a full-scale riot, unlike anything Madison Square Garden had ever witnessed. Roughly 500 fans actively participated in the violence. Over 300 chairs were smashed and used as weapons. 33 NYPD officers rushed to the arena to assist the Madison Square Garden security guards who were already overwhelmed. 2 policemen were injured in the melee. 2 fans were arrested. Life magazine sent photographers to document the aftermath, spreading images of the destruction across the country. At the subsequent New York State Athletic Commission hearing, officials had to decide what to do about the men they held responsible. Bruiser was banned for life from New York. He never wrestled at Madison Square Garden again for the rest of his career. Most wrestlers would have been devastated by losing access to the most famous arena in the world. Dick the Bruiser simply went elsewhere and kept drawing money. It did not slow him down in the slightest. The second defining incident came on April 23, 1963, at Lindell's Bar in Detroit, and it demonstrated exactly how thin the line was between Dick the Bruiser, the character, and William Afflis, the man. National Football League Sir Alex Karras, who had been suspended from football for gambling, had arranged a staged promotional brawl with Bruiser to build hype for their upcoming wrestling match. The script was simple. Bruiser would enter the bar, trade insults with Karras, and they would have a brief scuffle that reporters would conveniently witness. Nothing more than a publicity stunt to sell tickets. But when bar co-owner James Boutsikaris stepped in and told Bruiser to temper his remarks, feeling the insults were becoming too personal, Bruiser grabbed him. An uncle of the Boutsikaris brothers, completely unaware that the entire confrontation was staged, saw his family member being manhandled and did what any protective relative would do. He cracked Bruiser from behind with a pool cue, cutting him under the left eye. Bruiser went berserk. What happened next became legend in Detroit. He lifted a vending machine over his head, a feat of strength that should have been impossible, and hurled it across the room where it crushed a color television. He pitched stools and chairs through windows like they were made of cardboard. He systematically destroyed the establishment piece by piece. The staged fight had become terrifyingly real, and there was no script for what was happening. It took 8 police officers to subdue him. They had to bind both his hands and feet to finally stop him, treating him less like a man and more like a dangerous animal. One officer's wrist was broken in the struggle. Bruiser required 5 stitches for the cut under his eye and eventually paid $50,000 in damages to the bar owners. It was an enormous sum in 1963, enough to buy several houses. The match with Karras still happened days later. The publicity from the bar fight had made it the most talked-about event in Detroit sports. Bruiser pinned Karras in 11 minutes and 21 seconds at Olympia Stadium before a packed house. Karras left with teeth marks in his bicep, proof that even in a worked match, facing Dick the Bruiser was genuinely dangerous. Bruiser's post-match quote became legendary throughout the wrestling world. Football players should leave wrestling to wrestlers and go back to their betting. The message was clear. Do not mess with Dick the Bruiser. The staged fight had proven that, if anything, his reputation was actually understated. In March 1964, Bruiser and his business partner Wilbur Snyder purchased the Indianapolis NWA territory from promoter Jim Barnett for approximately $50,000. Barnett was departing for Australia to run wrestling there, and Bruiser saw an opportunity to control his own destiny rather than depending on other promoters for bookings. They renamed the territory the World Wrestling Association and began building one of the most successful regional operations in American wrestling history. The partnership with Snyder was a study in contrasts that worked perfectly. Snyder was a scientific wrestler, a technical master who had created the abdominal stretch and who went to a 1-hour draw with NWA World Champion Lou Thesz in a match that showcased pure wrestling skill. Bruiser was a brawler who solved problems with his fists and viewed technical wrestling as something other people did. Together, they covered every base the wrestling business required. Snyder could deliver the wrestling that purists demanded. Bruiser could deliver the violence that filled arenas. Because wrestlers could not simultaneously hold a promotional license and compete in the ring under state athletic commission rules, they cleverly put the license in their wives' names. The company was legally incorporated as Championship Wrestling of Indiana Incorporated. Early advertisements read El Aflis presents Championship Wrestling and listed Louise Aflis as the official license holder. It was one of many examples of Bruiser's business acumen, a quality often overshadowed by his reputation for violence. The man who destroyed bars also understood how to work within bureaucratic systems when necessary. Bruiser crowned himself the inaugural WWA World Heavyweight Champion on April 22, 1964, defeating Gene Kiniski in Indianapolis. He would hold that title an astonishing 13 times over the promotion's 25-year lifespan, trading it with a who's who of territorial-era stars, including Johnny Valentine, Wilbur Snyder, Baron von Raschke, Ivan Koloff, Bruiser Brody, Ernie Ladd, and many others. The WWA aired weekly on WTTV Channel 4 out of Bloomington and Indianapolis, reaching audiences across Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Kentucky. Programming included Championship Wrestling, Big Time Wrestling, and All-Star Championship Wrestling. Rather than joining the NWA as a member territory, Bruiser ran the WWA as an independent promotion with its own championships, while maintaining a crucial working agreement with the AWA that allowed talent sharing with Laverne Clarence's Minneapolis-based promotion. This gave him access to top-tier talent without having to answer to the NWA board of directors. The territory became a launching pad for future stars and an incubator for wrestling talent. Bobby Heenan got his start there as Pretty Boy Bobby Heenan, learning the manager trade by accompanying heel tag teams to the ring and drawing heat from Midwestern crowds before Bruiser gave him his famous Weasel nickname. David McLane rose through the ranks as a teenager, eventually managing day-to-day operations for Aflis. McLane would later found Glow, the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, using skills he learned in Indianapolis. Scott Steiner worked the WWA early in his career as Scott Rechsteiner. Al Snow also passed through the territory during its final years. The list of talent who headlined the territory reads like a WHOSWHU of the territorial era. Bruiser Brody brought his wild, brawling style for memorable feuds with the Boss. Ernie Ladd used his NFL fame and massive size to draw crowds. The Valiant Brothers provided tag team excellence. The Blackjacks, managed by Bobby Heenan, terrorized babyfaces across the territory. The Fabulous Kangaroos brought international flair. Ox Baker frightened children with his fearsome appearance. Ivan Koloff brought his Russian heel character. Harley Race periodically passed through between NWA title defenses. In 1971, Bruiser decided he wanted to expand. He launched an aggressive invasion of Detroit with All-Star Championship Wrestling, directly challenging the Sheik's big-time wrestling territory. It was an audacious move. The Sheik had controlled Detroit for years and was not known for backing down from confrontations. The promotional war lasted until approximately 1974, with both sides running competing shows and raiding each other's talent. Bruiser eventually pulled back without conquering Detroit, but he had established himself as someone willing to go to war for market share. Few promoters had the nerve to challenge an established territory so directly. The WWA's golden age stretched from the late 1960s through the 1970s. The territory was profitable, the television was consistent, and the arenas were full. But Vince McMahon's national expansion in the mid-1980s began draining talent, television time, and attendance from every regional territory across the country. The World Wrestling Federation was offering contracts that regional promoters could not match. They were buying up television time slots that had belonged to local wrestling for decades. The territorial system that had sustained American wrestling for generations was collapsing, and even Dick the Bruiser could not stop it. The WWA closed in 1989 after 25 years in business. Bruiser had fought the national expansion longer than most, but in the end, even the world's most dangerous wrestler could not defeat the World Wrestling Federation's checkbook. Of all Dick the Bruiser's accomplishments, none resonated more deeply with fans than his partnership with the Crusher. Reginald Lisowski was a fellow Midwestern brawler from Milwaukee, and together they became one of the most beloved tag teams in wrestling history. They represented something that transcended wrestling itself. They were the working-class heroes who talked like regular guys, drank beer like regular guys, and somehow managed to beat up everyone who got in their way. Billed as cousins, despite no actual blood relation, known as the Cussin' Cousins, and nicknamed by opponent Nick Bockwinkel as the Saloon Goons, the team first came together in 1963 and remained an on and off partnership for over 22 years until 1985. The team crystallized when they faced Larry Hennig and Harley Race in the AWA. Crusher had dubbed their opponents the Dolly Sisters, and the insult stuck. Fans organically adopted Bruiser and Crusher as full-fledged heroes through sheer crowd reaction rather than any scripted babyface turn. The people simply loved them too much to boo them anymore. Both were built like fire hydrants, short, stout, impossibly tough. They looked like they belonged behind a bar in a working-class neighborhood rather than in a wrestling ring. Their working-class authenticity resonated deeply with Midwest audiences who saw themselves in these two beer-drinking, hard-fighting everymen. When Bruiser and Crusher walked to the ring, they looked like your uncle and his buddy coming home from a long shift at the factory, ready to drink some beers and kick some ass. Their chemistry was genuine. Both loved beer, cigars, and a good fight. There was no acting required. They simply were what they appeared to be, and audiences could sense the authenticity. Their promos were legendary and endlessly entertaining. Crusher would boast about training by running up and down Halstead Street with a barrel of beer on our backs. He would brag about his 100-megaton biceps and call opponents turkey necks and a bum. He would promise to beat these two bums and then go down Halstead Street and dance the polka with all the girls and drink beer. If they felt they had not bloodied their opponents enough during a match, they would trade punches with each other afterward, a crowd-pleasing signature of their dynamic that always got the fans on their feet. It was their way of showing the audience that the violence was not finished. that there was more fight left in both of them even after the bell had rung. Together, they captured 11 tag team championships across multiple territories. 5 AWA World Tag Team titles with a combined reign of over 1,300 days. A record that spoke to their drawing power. 6 WWWF World Tag Team titles in Bruiser's home territory. The NWA International Tag Team Championship in Japan, defeating Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki on August 11, 1969, proving their appeal transcended American borders. They were named PWI Tag Team of the Year in 1972, recognition from the wrestling press that they were the best in the business. Their major feuds as a team included wars against the Vachon brothers, Hennig and Race, Blackjack Lanza and Bobby Duncombe, the Texas Outlaws consisting of Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch, and Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens. Each feud drew money and kept audiences coming back for more. As Jimmy Valiant observed, the Bruiser and Crusher were the first characters to wrestle where everybody loved them, no matter what they said or did. This opened the door for myself, Dusty, Superstar Graham, and Jesse the Body. Their proto-anti-hero personas, the hell-raising, beer-drinking, authority-defying attitude, were the direct blueprint for what Steve Austin would globalize 3 decades later. Every time Austin crushed beer cans together, he was channeling Bruiser and Crusher, whether he knew it or not. David Letterman was so influenced by watching Bruiser and the Crusher on Midwest television as a young man that he named his late-night band the world's most dangerous band, in direct tribute to Bruiser's nickname. It was a reference that older Midwest viewers immediately understood. For an entire generation of Midwesterners, you simply did not get more famous than Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher. Bruiser's championship resume spans an extraordinary breadth of territories, and it reflects his 3-decade dominance of Midwestern wrestling. He was a 16-time world champion across multiple promotions, a number that speaks to both his drawing power and his willingness to put others over when the business required it. He won the AWA World Heavyweight Championship in November 1966, defeating Mad Dog Vachon in a brutal match that gave the top prize in a major promotion to one of wrestling's most violent performers. He lost it back to Vachon 7 days later in one of the shortest reigns in AWA history. But the victory itself was significant. It proved that Laverne Clarence trusted him with the top prize, even briefly. He held the WWA World Heavyweight Championship 13 times across 21 years, trading it with opponents to build feuds and draw money in his home territory. His tag team championship totals reached approximately 20 reigns with various partners, including the Crusher, Wilbur Snyder, and Bruno Sammartino, with whom he formed a team called Annihilation Inc. His major feuds included prolonged wars with the Sheik that drew thousands across the Midwest. Their matches were violent even by the standards of their era, with both men bleeding freely and weapons being employed at every opportunity. His 1979 chain match against Bruiser Brody in Chicago was infamous for its unrestrained violence, with 2 men who genuinely did not like each other taking liberties in the ring. He battled Harley Race, Ernie Ladd, Baron von Raschke, and virtually every major heel who passed through the territories where he worked. Each feud drew money, and each opponent left knowing they had been in a fight. Outside the ring, Bruiser lived most of his adult life on the northwest side of Indianapolis, while maintaining a winter home in Largo, Florida. He was married at least twice, and his widow at the time of his death was Louise Afflez. He had a son named Carl, who briefly wrestled as Leroy Redbone before Carl's death in 2009. He had a daughter named Michelle, who married wrestler Spike Huber, though the marriage later ended in divorce. He had an adopted son named John Carney, who was with him on the morning he died. His wrestling lineage continues through a great-grandson named Kevin Anthony, who wrestles as Emo Warrior and trained at the Jacobs Pritchard Wrestling Academy. Despite his fearsome persona, those close to him knew a gentler side. When his foot accidentally tore a reporter's jacket during a match, Bruiser tracked the man down and offered to buy him a new coat. He was a dedicated fundraiser for the Muscular Dystrophy Association and other charitable organizations. He was beloved in his Indianapolis community in ways that would have surprised fans who only knew him from television. On the morning of November 10, 1991, Bruiser was lifting weights with his adopted son, John Carney, at his Florida home. It was a routine morning for a man who had kept himself in physical condition throughout his life. He was 62 years old, but still powerful, still maintaining the physique that had made him famous. Without warning, he ruptured a blood vessel in his esophagus. It was the same area that had been damaged by the football kick to his throat nearly 4 decades earlier with the Green Bay Packers. The injury that had given him his famous gravelly voice, the injury that had helped create Dick the Bruiser, had finally caught up with him in the most devastating way possible. He was rushed to Suncoast Hospital in Largo, Florida. The internal bleeding was severe. Despite the efforts of medical professionals, there was nothing that could be done. Dick the Bruiser died of internal bleeding that morning. He was 62 years old. The kick that made him Dick the Bruiser had also in the end made him mortal. The same wound that had launched his wrestling career had taken his life. There was a cruel poetry to it that even the most creative wrestling booker could not have scripted. He was entombed at Washington Park North Cemetery in Indianapolis, in the Garden of Resurrection Mausoleum. He was buried in the city he had called home for most of his adult life, where he had built his wrestling empire and that had embraced him as one of its own. Dick the Bruiser has been inducted into 6 Halls of Fame. He is in the WCW Hall of Fame in 1994, the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame in 1996, the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame twice, once as a tag team with the Crusher in 2005 and individually in 2011, the St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2007, and the WWE Hall of Fame Legacy Wing in 2021. He was ranked number 11 on a list of the top 50 professional wrestlers in history. But his legacy extends far beyond championships and Hall of Fame plaques. He was among the first heels to regularly cut intense promos and to use weapons and tactics that are now fundamental to the business. He pioneered the promoter-performer dual role that others would later perfect. His beer-drinking, anti-authority, working-class persona predated Steve Austin by 3 decades. He launched Bobby Heenan's career and gave him his most famous nickname. He built a 25-year territorial empire out of Indianapolis that launched countless careers. Most importantly, he proved that authenticity could be the most powerful gimmick of all. In an era of sequined robes and theatrical characters, Dick the Bruiser walked to the ring in nothing but trunks and boots. Somehow that absence of gimmick became the most memorable gimmick of all. As his biographer Richard Vichek wrote, Bruiser left an indelible mark on pro wrestling history that will never be matched in either longevity or significance. He had so many stitches on his head that it looked like a baseball, and he boasted about every single one of them. The world's most dangerous wrestler earned that title every single night for 37 years. And unlike most things in professional wrestling, there was nothing fake about it. Leave a comment below telling us your favorite Dick the Bruiser story or match. And if you have suggestions for future videos, we would love to hear them. Until next time.